GRR in British English and GLAMOR in American English. Introduction. Not Knowing Grammar. A Student's Tale. I was giving a new intake of undergraduates their first lecture on English grammar. It was the early 1970s, a few years after the formal teaching of grammar had disappeared from the school curriculum in the UK, and I was about to experience one of the consequences. I'd given this course several times. The main aim of my opening lecture was to make students aware of the contrast between the old ways of learning about grammar they'd experienced in school and the new approaches they would encounter at university. To do this, I would take an example of a rule I knew they would all have been taught: never end a sentence with a preposition. Many older listeners will recall having had that rule dinned into them. I'll explain where the rule came from in Chapter 12. In my class, I simply illustrated what the rule did. They would have been told, but the first of the following two sentences was incorrect, and the second was correct. This is the man I was talking to. This is the man to whom I was talking. I would then go on to show how sentences with prepositions at the end have been used in English since Anglo-Saxon times. Give some examples from Shakespeare, to be or not to be, and fly to others that I know not of, and point out that today the difference is one of style. The second sentence is much more formal than the first. Both are acceptable in standard English, but the first is more likely to be found in informal speech, and the second in formal writing. Today, I'd add that you don't see the second one much on Facebook. Anyway, on that day in the early 1970s, I was halfway through my usual explanation when I noticed that my audience had begun to fidget. More than usual. Some were whispering to each other. I stopped what I was saying and asked, "Is there a problem?" One student put her hand up. "Please," she said, "what's a preposition?" Well, I was, as I used to say in Liverpool, gobsmacked. I'd never been asked that question before. It had never occurred to me that someone, now aged 18, could have gone through school without learning what a preposition was. I asked the audience, "How many of you don't know what a preposition is?" Most put their hands up. I couldn't believe it. "I think I know," said another student. Thank goodness, I thought, and asked her to continue. Then she said, "Is it something to do with getting on a horse?" There's no single word in Liverpudlian slang for a greater degree of gobsmackedness. I think I croaked, "How do you mean?" "Well," she said, "I was always told that a preposition was what one had to adopt when preparing to mount." She pronounced it preposition. It was the first time I realized how great the change had been in schools. Within just a few years, less than a decade, many students were leaving school with no knowledge of grammar at all. It seems that the teaching of grammar just stopped. I discovered later that it wasn't just a British thing. A similar disaffection had taken place in other mother tongue countries where English was a classroom subject. A few schools kept it going, especially in relation to the teaching of Latin or a modern language, which is why some of my class smugly knew what a preposition was. But in relation to English, it was as if grammar had never been. I'll talk later about why all this happened and what replaced it. But the consequences of this radical change of direction were long-lasting. When grammar began to re-emerge in schools in the 1990s, in Britain as part of the national curriculum, there was a widespread uncertainty among teachers about how to handle it, for the obvious reason that these teachers had never had any grammatical training themselves. That uncertainty continues today. It isn't just teachers. Parents, too, those who have never had any grammar training either, are nonplussed when their child now turns to